Okay, so today we are going to learn about hypothetical arguments. And another word for hypothetical is conditional. So you might hear me using the word conditional interchangeably with hypothetical. So for our purposes, these are going to mean the same thing. And basically, a hypothetical statement is one that's an if statement. So here's an example. If J and C sit nearby, they will prate incessantly. And so what you've seen I've done here is I have included one of our vocab words, prate, and I've also, just put in some random letters that may or may not represent boys in our class. So J and C. So if they sit nearby, then they will prate incessantly. So this is my statement. And this statement has two parts. It has a red part and it has a blue part. And the red part is the actual if part of it, and that is called the antecedent. And ante means before. We know that because in poker, when you're betting, your first bet is called your ante, which is your before bet. So that's the only reason why I know that. The second part of your hypothetical statement is here in blue, and that's called the consequent. So you all know this from your parents, and they're like, you don't clean your room, there's going to be consequences, mister. Notice that that was a hypothetical statement right there. Okay, so you have your consequent, the thing that happens after. So your antecedent comes first, and then your consequent comes second. And right now, all I have is a statement. But if I put these together with other statements and a conclusion, I can form a syllogism. And you might remember that a syllogism always has two premises and a conclusion. And so if I'm using a hypothetical statement in there, it becomes a hypothetical syllogism. It's not a categorical syllogism like we were doing before. Categorical syllogisms deal with making claims about categories of things. Hypothetical syllogisms deal with hypothetical situations. And so right now, I do not have a syllogism, I just have a statement. In order to make it a syllogism, I need one more premise and I need a couple statements. I can do that. And that's called a pure hypothetical syllogism. I am going to have two premises and I'm going to have a conclusion. And because it's called a pure syllogism, that means that every single one of my statements was a hypothetical statement. Okay? So let's take this and let's make it into a syllogism. So my first premise here is that if J and C, anonymous students, sit nearby one another, they will prate incessantly. That's my first statement. Okay? I'm going to make another statement that's going to be another premise. Okay? And here is my other premise. If students prate, incessantly, I'm going to abbreviate there. If students prate incessantly, then what's the consequence? Well, the consequence is that Mrs. Warren will become enraged. Enraged. Duh. Okay. So if students prate incessantly, then Mrs. Warren will become enraged. So these are my two premises. And remember that in a syllogism, you are just going to assume these are true. Now, here is my conclusion. And remember, if this is going to be a pure hypothetical syllogism, then my conclusion is also going to be a hypothetical statement. It's going to be an if statement. Okay, And here's how I do this, okay? Think of this like I have 3 dominoes that are all stacked up, just the perfect distance from each other. And if I push on the first domino, it's going to hit the second domino, and then that means that the third domino will automatically fall, okay? So here's the first domino, J and C sitting nearby each other, okay? If that happens, then we know for a fact it's going to hit the second domino, which is them prating incessantly. And we know that that domino causes something else to happen. If students prate incessantly, then Mrs. Warren gets angry, okay? So what we know for sure here is this. We know, as a matter of fact, that if J and C sit near each other, well, what is automatically guaranteed to happen? Well, what's automatically guaranteed to happen is that Mrs. Warren's going to get mad. Okay? So this right here, this is called a pure hypothetical syllogism. And it's automatically valid because of the way I did it. Because of the way I set it up where as soon as J and C are sitting near each other, they start talking. As soon as people are talking, Mrs. Warren gets mad. And so that means you can trust that if they're sitting next to each other, it's going to end up with Mrs. Warren getting mad. So that's called a pure hypothetical syllogism. And it's called that because every single statement is a hypothetical statement. Okay? There are other kinds of hypothetical syllogisms that are not pure. And that means that there's part of the argument that's not a conditional statement. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to look at mixed hypothetical syllogisms. And by mixed, what I mean is that there is going to be one hypothetical statement, but then the other statements are not going to be hypothetical. And so we're going to look at 4 main types of those. Okay. So these are kind of famous arguments. They're kind of a big deal. They've, they have 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. Daniel, it's crazy. Okay, so here is the first mixed hypothetical syllogism. It's still going to have 2 premises and a conclusion, just like all syllogisms do. This one has a name. That's how cool it is, and it's Latin, which is even cooler. And so this one's called Modus Ponens. Now, I am not going to tell you what that means because that is in one of your assignments to look that up. So go ahead and look that up on a search engine and find out what that translates to. And so here's what Modus Ponens looks like. And I am not going to use actual terms here. I'm just going to use letters. So here's my hypothetical statement. If P, then Q. Why P and Q? I have no idea. Maybe you can look it up and find out. However, all I'm using is just, it's like variables in math. It's just like anything could go there. So if this happens, then that will happen as a result. This is my antecedent. This is my consequent. Okay? My second premise is just going to be a statement, and I am actually going to say that P, this thing right here, actually did happen. Okay, so there are my 2 premises. Now my conclusion is I am going to say, as a result, that means that Q necessarily must happen also. Okay? So here is my statement. I said, if P happens, then Q is going to happen. P did happen, therefore Q definitely is going to happen. Okay? This mixed hypothetical syllogism is valid. It's always valid. And it's kind of basic. It's kind of like, if you guys talk one more time, I will call your mom. And let's say that you talked one more time. If I'm going to be valid in what I said, that means I'm going to call your mom. Okay? So we could put all sorts of terms in here. If you fill up the jar with beads, then I will throw you guys a party. You finally filled up the jar with beads, and that means if I'm going to be valid about what I said, that means I better throw you a party as a result. Okay? So this is Modus Ponens, and it's always valid. There are ways to use symbols to represent this, so we don't have to use words. So here are the symbols for that. The symbols to represent a conditional statement or a hypothetical statement, it looks like a horseshoe, and it looks like this. I'll use red. So this right here, we would look at that, and we would say, if P, then Q. It means the exact same thing as that. It's just using symbols, and it's this little horseshoe thing that we use. If P, then Q. P is my second premise, the first thing I'm saying that actually happened. And then I have my little therefore symbol, and then Q. So again, this is called Modus Ponens, and it's always valid. There is another form of argument in there. And I'm going to do that on the next video.